The following is an exclusive presentation of WRHU Radio Sports.
Yorker with the rebound, the shot, finally falls at the buzzer. The Flying Dutchman win it. John Yorker with an incredible last-second shot. What a terrific shot by John Yorker. All kinds of bodies flying all over the place.
Schaefer will inbound for Hofstra. Long inbound pass, intercepted by West, but the shot will be no good. Hofstra wins the ACC tournament. The Hofstra Flying Dutchmen have won it for the first time since 1977. The Flying Dutchmen have shocked everyone here and come away with the tournament victory.
And we are back. It is the Sports Guys from the 80s. Tony Sibilla, Steve Goldman, and Marshall Hausfeld, happy to be here with you, celebrating yet another anniversary of WRHU Radio Hofstra University, the 60th year here in the year 2019. And we're here to talk a little bit about our time at WRHU at the time, Radio Hofstra, and what we did and didn't do, and what kind of trouble we might have gotten into, and all sorts of fun things. Again, happy to be here, back on the airwaves on WRHU one more time. Again, I'm Tony Sibilla. I did a lot of different jobs, but certainly did play-by-play, color announcing. We did the sports rap talk show. We called football and basketball for the most part. We didn't have several other sports to call at the time. That was it. So I was there from 85 to 87. I've worked at WGN Radio, WABC, and I'm currently at Music Choice. If you've got cable TV in your home and you've got 45 channels of music, that's us, in case you didn't know. I've been there for since 96, so I've been around at that place for a long time. And Marshall, Marshall Hausfeld, you've been at MSNBC since it started in 96, correct?
Yep, a long-time NBC veteran. A lot of work in their documentary unit, avid video editor, and been great. And I was at RHU from 87. I'm the class of 91, and I pretty much spent the 4 years, carrying water for you and Steve.
Steve Goldman with us as well. Steve, talk about your past at WRHU and what you're up to now.
Thank you, Tony. It's always good to be here. I'm Steve Goldman. I was a student at Hofstra from 1986 until 1990. I was sports director at the radio station for a year and a half. Our close friend, Stu Rushfield, and I were co-sports director for the first half of my junior year. And then so at the end of 88, 89, and then 89, 90, I was the sports director my senior year. I did a little bit of work in radio and TV. I worked at a small radio station in California, and then I worked for 6 months at ESPN. But unfortunately, my broadcasting career didn't work out too well, so I went back to Hofstra, got a master's degree in education, and now for the last 24 years, I am a high school math teacher and currently in my 16th year teaching in Dix Hills at Half Hollow Hills High School East.
Crushing the hopes of high schoolers for 16 years now, I assume.
Oh, well, it's probably been longer than that. And, the best moments are when the students come back after they graduate and tell me how much I've ruined their lives forever. And
it makes it all worth it.
That's right. It absolutely makes it all worth it. But seriously, folks, the advantage of being involved with the radio station certainly comes in handy because I am heavily involved with our athletic programs, specifically the football team, the basketball team, and the lacrosse team. For football, I have did my first year as the public address announcer for the football games, which is always a lot of fun. And for basketball, I operate the scoreboard, but I also introduce the starting lineup. So my broadcasting training certainly comes in handy at school as well. So it's really a merger of my two former lives and my two loves together.
Yeah, my broadcast experience has lent itself lately to doing live streaming for gaming, which clearly I'm on the older edge of the guys who are doing it now. But But it's amazing how much that's blown up. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. But let's talk about what it was like doing radio in the mid to late 80s. And, I'm mid-80s. Marshall likes to remind us that he's younger than us, which is fine, but not too much younger.
Well, a year, if you want.
A year.
By the way, who is keeping track of the in my day count? Because I have a feeling.
Well,
I have a feeling
that's
going to be quite high.
I kept a lot of stats. I will keep a column open.
Oh, yes,
I'll keep a stat column open for in my day.
Yes, exactly. Well,
yes, or the we didn't have bit.
Well, there's a lot of we didn't haves we'll get to eventually, but back in the 80s, Marsh and I were talking a little bit before we started the show here. TV was, the TV track probably had a lot more of attention because at that time there were new studios, newer equipment, people looking to get to that point because it was, maybe a more glamorous track, whatever reason. But yet still we had a lot of people who got involved in radio. And I was always amazed that anybody wanted to be involved with radio because of what was going on the TV side. Marsh, you've gotten involved on the video side, obviously. What was your attraction to getting involved with RHU at the time?
Well, it was the ability, really, to be part of a sports department that broadcast games. The Television Institute, the TV department, had all this wonderful equipment, but really, other than the classes, they didn't use it. They had a remote truck that was beautiful and 3 remote cameras, and it was perfectly equipped to broadcast games or do whatever, and the university wouldn't let you do it. It just stayed in its nice parking spot and collected dust. And it was like, well, if you want to broadcast games, because every 17-year-old back then wanted to be Bob Costas or Dick Enberg. And to do that, the radio station actually had an audience. You could actually gain experience and learn a craft and broadcast games. So that was what brought me to the radio station.
Steve, did you have any desire to do TV, or was it all radio at the time?
Well, what attracted me to Hofstra in general was the year that I started there, which was 1986. They had just opened the building. I guess it was Dempster Hall back then. So, and in addition, it was also Hofstra's third. It was approaching on Hofstra's 50th anniversary as a university, because that was back in 1985, and then the radio station was celebrating its 35th anniversary. So there was a lot of advertising, because I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I really never had heard of Hofstra before when I started looking at schools, but they were doing so much aggressive advertising about all of these wonderful things. So, yeah, I think TV certainly appealed to me, but as both of you know, I definitely have a face for radio. So, of course, the radio station definitely appealed to me. And I mean, obviously, when we were kids growing up, we grabbed a little twig and we pretended that we were announcing, whatever the kids were playing, a pickup football game or basketball game, whatever.
Sure.
We would sit there and we would just broadcast. And, of course, like you said, the legends, Bob Costas, Dick Enberg, Marv Albert, those are always so. So yeah, I did want it, but like Marshall said, what was there to get involved with the TV? I mean, they didn't really do anything. I mean, News and Views, I think, was maybe a couple of years in.
Right.
So if I wanted to do something, especially like Marshall said, to be on the air, it had to be the radio station. And granted, as a freshman, full of energy and full of, wide eye and wonder, I had no idea what to expect, but I said, let me check it out. Because actually the funny thing is I actually went to a meeting at the Hofstra Chronicle, because I said, well, maybe writing for a newspaper might be kind of fun. And that's where I actually met Pete Caldera, a good friend of ours. And he was the one who told me, he said, yeah, come down to the radio station. We're having our first meeting whenever it was. And so that's when I bailed out on the Chronicle and went to the radio station.
And at the time, easily, I think radio was the most organized. Like you said, we had a schedule. We knew what we were doing. We had the we had every game scheduled out. We had our teams, our play-by-play and color teams all figured out. So there was a lot more organization towards sports at the time, and so calling games was a natural. The college at the time was was well into having the radio station call games. Everyone in the athletic department was incredibly supportive. You know, there have been people who are still around now. Jim Sheehan and Cindy Lewis were always very supportive of us covering the games, doing whatever they could to help us out. So I think that helped out too. On the sports side, we were supported well. We did a pretty professional job, I feel, and the people in the college who saw what we did or heard what we did had a lot of respect for what we were capable of doing, and I think that probably helped out as well.
Well, also the players really liked what we did too. I mean, how many times did we hear them say "radio guys"? I mean, they really did appreciate the fact that that we were supporting them, but we were also obviously promoting them. Granted, in my day, we're dealing with a radio station that basically covered Nassau County, and that was basically it. Like, if you got close to the George Washington Bridge, maybe you got a signal, and maybe as you got to kind of the border of Nassau and Suffolk, the signal might have faded. So we're talking about a very limited scope of an audience. It's not like you could broadcast on a web channel, or you had this streaming capability where now the radio station can be heard as long as you have the ability to get on the web. You can hear the radio station.
Which is tremendous.
And yes. We had no other. Now there are broadcasts that are web exclusive, and quite frankly, while it's nice to be on the radio station for sure, to be on the web is a much bigger potential audience. You've got alumni who are out there, and any other prospective radio people who catch an idea of what WRHU is about can jump on the internet and listen to the station and say, hey, you know what, that's they do a really good job. And so, the internet part of it, we didn't have that. And we didn't have the podcast. Yeah, I know too. We didn't have the podcast. So, there weren't those other options. You either got on the air for a game or you didn't. We did some practice games. Marshall can remember a couple that we did, but it wasn't. There were no other options. You were on the air or you weren't, and you worked hard to get your chance to be on the air.
Right, and it enables underclassmen to really get their shot earlier than maybe you would have if you only had the one outlet.
Right, and as great of an opportunity as it was, there were some downsides to doing radio back then. And again, you can count 3 now if you want to. I look at pictures. I saw a picture the other day of Todd Ant being interviewed sideline with some of the current RHU staff during a game or during halftime. And I'm looking at the equipment they have, and I'm like, oh, my goodness,
Yes.
It's amazing what these kids have now, and I'm sure they're very thankful for it. And the radio station's gone out of their way to make sure they've got the best equipment they can have. But back then, we were on a phone line. We might have had a microphone and a mixer. Sometimes, I remember doing one game in Stony Brook. We had no power. Stu and I had to pass the phone back and forth to each other to call the game. So we were able to live with what we were given back then, and we had the ingenuity to pull off things like a live call-in show, which we had to have a 7-second delay. We did that by stringing 2 reel-to-reel machines together, and maybe we'll explain what a reel-to-reel machine is to the younger audience later. But
we did the math.
Yeah,
go math.
Yeah.
I just remember not being able to hear the studio when going during a timeout, going back to the studio for an update. You couldn't hear. You didn't have a return line. You couldn't hear what was going on back then. So you had an egg timer, pretty much for 30 seconds. And it was like, okay, when the egg timer is off, we hope that the person there is done because we're going to start talking.
Yeah.
Well, especially when we were on the road, because basically our return line at home was somebody brought a radio that had the radio station, so we could hear what was going on at the radio station. But obviously on the road, we didn't have that capability. So yes, it had to be supremely timed. And of course, even talking about equipment, I don't think it was until my sophomore year that we even had headset microphones. So the fact that we had to hold a microphone and also of course, we had to write things down, keep track of stats, whatever it was. So trying to hold a microphone, trying to keep track of what we were doing on the air, as well as trying to call a game. I just distinctly remember the first time I called a game with my headsets. I'm just flailing out my arms thinking how great this is, that now I have two hands that can actually do something besides.
And you punched out an assistant SID while you did it, too.
Well, I know, but, I try not to tell that story, but thanks for bringing that up.
The dark days.
Yes.
Yeah, it was, hooking up a mixer to a telephone back then was really a precursor to MacGyver, because it was wires and alligator clips, and we could sit here and explain it to you, but it was a bit of a nightmare, and but we figured it out. We did what we had to because we wanted to be on the air that badly.
Well, traveling to road games with all that equipment in these big metal suitcases, and if we ever had to take an airplane, those things would not pass TSA muster.
Oh no,
they would have. It was all wires and cables and everything that would look suspicious now. Even looked suspicious back then. And they said you can't bring that on board. That looked too much like an explosive device.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was like, no, it's really we're radio guys. Look at us, aren't we professional? We have our little WRHU pins and everything. And they said, no, those will have to be checked.
And no truer name than calling it the Strong Box, because that thing weighed a ton, and it was bulky, and you couldn't even fit it into like the back seat of a car, or it had you had to sort of manipulate the seats in order to get it in the car, and that thing was huge. And of course, back in our day when we were broadcasting Division III football at the stadium, of course there was no super duper fancy press box back then.
No.
So we had to actually carry this 50-pound behemoth up a ladder to get to the second floor of the press box so we could set up our equipment.
Through a hole in the floor that was only slightly bigger than the Strong Box. So it was always fun to make that trip. But you know what, guys? I for all the complaining and the back in my day stuff, we and as much as I love today's equipment, and I've got a garage full of stuff I barely use anymore for broadcasting, but I would love to be able to do games now because of what they have, but I still wouldn't trade anything for what we dealt with, because I think some of the adversity that we had to go through, I think, probably made us a little more resilient when it came time to go out in the work world and find work and work in situations. It's something Jeff Krause always said to us is you may not think everything is great here, but trust me, you're going to go to a small radio station when you first start out, and it's going to be worse than you think it is here. And I got to tell you, I've been in plenty of small radio stations, a decade or so after I graduated, and he was absolutely right. And I think, I think maybe it made us stronger that we didn't have to, we didn't have great stuff, but we learned how to deal with what we had. And I think it was a learning experience like college should be.
Yes.
Well, that's the one thing I wonder about today, because if you tour our facilities now, there's barely professional radio stations that can rival what kind of equipment and studio and facilities. So I wonder for the recent graduates that when they go out and try to work their way through radio, what kind of a letdown it is for them to realize that in the professional world, they're not using as good equipment as they are when they were in college.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that, I'm hoping a lot of these smaller stations have upgraded, but, a lot of them don't have money and don't necessarily have the wherewithal to go ahead and, bring things to current. They may still be using the 1956 Gates board that we were using back then at Radio Hofstra. And, again, old equipment, but I think, you and I, Steve, started out at WABC engineering, and it was like, what is this stuff? This is ridiculously great. But because we were used to dealing with adversity, I think we did well there because of that.
Totally, and yeah, that was another experience. I always seem to forget that the summer I spent at WABC with you and with Stu,
right.
all three of us working there. It's funny. We joked, when we were in college together, when we go to your house for a Super Bowl party, and we kind of joke around and say, wouldn't it be cool if all three of us would call a Super Bowl? Well, for a summer, we basically had our Super Bowl because you were the lead engineer for the New York Yankees. Stu was basically an engineering supervisor, and I was a board op. That eventually I started out as an intern, but because of job openings, I eventually got a job as an engineer for a summer, and I was put on the Yankee games. So there was, as a matter of fact, there was one day, it was a Saturday, where you were at Yankee Stadium, I was on the board, and Stu was supervising.
Right.
So I said to myself, well, I guess this is our Super Bowl. We have three knuckleheads from
Nice.
Hofstra University in charge of the entire New York Yankee radio network.
What a mistake that was.
Yes, and fortunately, that broadcast that day went without a hitch,
Yeah.
so we kept our jobs.
Exactly.
These were the Mel Hall Yankees?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yes.
I've
Yes,
been
they
on a
were.
plane with Mel Hall and Jesse Barfield, and yeah.
That was summer of
about all I'll say.
1989. Was
Yeah.
when, that happened. So that'll be 30 years ago this summer when that
That's
happened.
ridiculous.
But like you said before about how we wouldn't trade it. Well, the thing is nowadays I can't imagine that there's any sort of engineering or setup stories that they would have like back in our day.
Oh, yeah.
7.
That, like, for example, for our football games, the phone company sets up a dedicated line that we call a dry line, without getting into too much technical jargon here, that was directly wired into the station. So when our home broadcast team would set up, we connected to the dry line, we'd send some audio back there, they would receive it, and everything would be fine. We didn't need a phone for home games.
Right.
So one day we're playing a football game, and I can't remember who we're playing against, but we're setting up our equipment as usual, and we're sending our audio feed to the station, and the station isn't receiving it. So now we're thinking, well, what do we do? We're trying other things. I'm unplugging, replugging. All of a sudden, the visiting radio guys come over to us and say, "Are you trying to send audio?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, it's coming through our equipment because the phone company gave our dedicated phone line to the visiting radio station."
No, you're lying.
Yes,
the
they
phone
did.
company couldn't have made a mistake, I think.
No, of course not. So we ended up having to go downstairs into the main area of the press box, and and as you said, we had to literally call in a game at home that sounded like a road game because we had to pass the phone back and forth to each other to broadcast our game that day.
Yeah.
And how are you going to get a story like that today?
Yeah. No, we had to do that at the old PFC. Now you have a nice, shiny, brand new arena to watch basketball games in. But back in our day, we had the PFC and the bleachers, and our dedicated line was under the bleachers, and you had to go under the bleachers and find the wire and fish it up through the bleachers because that's where we sat.
But fortunately, there were no people that were going to take the wires out, because if we broadcast those games in front of 40 people in the stands, that would be a lot.
Yeah,
and we were three of them because back in our day there was no press table.
Yes.
So they set up two long tables in like the third or fourth row of the bleachers.
Yes.
And that's where the broadcast was. We sat in the bleachers. The pep band actually sat behind us, which was always quite interesting. It made for good natural sound.
Yeah.
But obviously during timeouts and things, it was really annoying when they would start playing their music and we would yell at, we're sitting next to each other. We have to yell at each other about what we were going to talk about coming out of a break. But like you said, not just connect to the phone line, but it was basically 50 feet of phone line because the phone line was connected to the wall. And of course, when they opened out the bleachers. So that was another wonderful experience and wonderful memories of sitting up in the stands. And, with your intro, listening to one of those clips where Stu says finally falls at the buzzer, that was my first broadcast done on Hofstra Radio. That the game against Manhattan in what they called the Hofstra Classic, when John Yarger won the game at the buzzer, and you heard a little clip of me talking about trying to describe how exciting that was, a scramble for the rebound and all kinds of bodies flying all over the place.
Steve, you mean this one?
Yarger with the rebound, the shot finally falls at the buzzer. The Flying Dutchman win it. Flying Dutchman win at the buzzer. John Yarger with an incredible last-second shot off the rebound, off the miss by John Bolello, and the Flying Dutchman come away with a 67-65 victory. What a terrific shot by John Yorker. A scramble for the rebound, and it was all kinds of bodies flying all over the place. John Yorker coming with the rebound on the way down, throws it off the glass, bounces around the rim, goes in, and Hofstra wins the basketball game. Incredible, Stu. I don't know how to describe this.
He didn't know how to describe it, Marshall.
Just spent 25 minutes just describing it.
He didn't know how to describe
I don't know
it.
how to describe it.
That is a Hofstra University sports classic right there.
Yep.
Are we
Yep. And that was
permitted?
that was my first game ever broadcast on Hofstra Radio.
Are we permitted to use the term Flying Dutchman now? Do they use it at all anymore, or are they strictly the Pride?
Actually, they did, because in the alumni, they had an alumni game at last Saturday's home game, and they used even the old. I didn't even realize that there was an actual Flying Dutchman logo, because my my wonderful wife, as one of my Hanukkah presents, bought me a hoodie with this Flying Dutchman logo. It's got a rocket ship with like a guy wearing like a leather helmet,
Wow.
Yeah, I've
sitting
seen
on
that.
top of it.
Yes.
It's beautiful. So yes, so on Saturday they referred to the team as the Flying Dutchman, and they used that actual logo on their big beautiful. Now they have these big beautiful video boards that they just installed at the Mac Center. It's really nice. I mean, it's really given quite an atmosphere. So yes, they did refer to the team as the Flying Dutchman in a throwback game.
Hey, we're gonna take a quick break here and play a little something for you. We'll come back. We'll start talking about the teams that we cover. And even though we picked on Steve a little bit, we're going to take a little opportunity to pick on Marshall a little bit with this one.
Thank you very much, Tony Sibilla. And just some news for you that former Network Pro Football prognosticator Jimmy the Greek Snyder has been released from a Durham, North Carolina hospital in good condition, according to a hospital spokesman. The 70-year-old Snyder underwent tests over the past few days that discovered a blockage in one of his arteries. Snyder lost his job with CBS earlier this month after making an unpopular comment about black and white athletes. Now back to the PFC and Tony and Pam.
I don't know what's going on back there, but a good rendition on the kazoo of Hooray for Hollywood.
Someone's got some great musical talent back there in the studio, Tony.
Hi, I'm Bob Costas of NBC Sports, and you're listening to 88.7 WRHU, the Sports Guys. I listen to them all the time, and when I'm out of town, I demand that they send me tapes, which I listen to like a lullaby to rock me to sleep.
Some fun at a basketball game a long time ago where Pam Banky, former Hofstra University women's basketball player who was sidelined that season, came by with me to call a game, and Marshall Hausfeld doing an update.
I was amazed I didn't crack up entirely. I was able to make it through the update because the music playing in the background was not part of the RHU library at the time.
No.
That wasn't part of it wasn't in the main rotation. But you mentioned Pete Caldera earlier. Pete had a knack for avoiding the engineering aspect of doing the games.
Yes.
He wanted to do play-by-play. He would do color. He would do updates. But if you asked him to run the board, he would find a paper to write or some other excuse not to do it. Mm-hmm. And Stu Rushfield, who was the sports director at the time, said, look, Pete, if you want to do another game at all for the rest of the year, you got to engineer this game. So he did. And I was doing updates, and I guess he was rummaging through the carts and the list of the music beds and everything. And I don't know where this came from, but he said, all right, I'm ready for the next update. I'm ready when it happens. And it happened, and that popped on in my ear, and I was just thankful that I wasn't reading something solemn that Jimmy the Greek actually died. I was just reading, he was in the hospital. Okay, so at least it wasn't totally inappropriate, but that's how that came about. And I think that was just Pete's way of saying, you want me to engineer? I don't think I should. I don't think he engineered another game after that.
Well, and that's actually the same Pete Caldera, who is a Yankee beat writer for the Bergen Record, I believe is the paper he's working on now.
Yes.
He's been with them for a while now, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
He's been covering them for a long, long time.
So another success story. Not all of them always translated to radio back in those days. A lot of the folks who got involved in radio weren't necessarily folks who absolutely positively wanted to do radio as a career. Pete always wanted to be a writer. If it could have worked into broadcasting, I'm sure he would have done it. But yeah, he loved writing, and I think that's always what he wanted to do. So
either that or play Sinatra tunes. He's an incredible voice.
Yeah,
he does. I know he performs at
yes, he does.
And so if he wasn't doing games, he wanted to be in his tuxedo and performing the standards.
Yeah, Pete was a throwback to the 40s for sure, and but he still fit in really well with the sports guys. We were an odd bunch of different types of characters, and it all seemed to work out well. We all got along really well, and if there's part of college life that I hold dearly more than anything else was my time down at the radio station. Tried to live there as much as possible, really, and even guys like you who lived on campus, you were at the station a lot most of the time.
Absolutely.
One of the advantages, like right now, the radio station and the TV station, they're all in the same building. Back in our day, it was separated. We were in the basement of Memorial Hall, which in terms of going to class was actually a much more convenient building if you were going to another class. So in between classes, it was a lot easier to hang out at the basement of the radio station than it was to hang out at Dempster Hall. So yes, in between classes, you ended up spending a lot of time and interacting there.
Plus, it was underneath Bits and Bytes, so if it was a mealtime, whether it was lunchtime or dinner time, and it happened to be on that side of campus, it was easy to grab something to eat and just bring it down to the radio station and eat down on the radio station. But it's funny you mentioned about Pete Caldera. Pete was actually responsible for giving me my nickname, which is always quite an interesting story.
Peaches.
Yes, indeed.
I thought about it, and obviously, back in the day, you may hear a promo later where Stu calls me Hammer. Marshall escaped without a nickname. I realized that last night.
Yes. I believe I was just Marsh.
Yes,
and still am. So
because back in those days, everybody in the sports department had to have a nickname for whatever reason. And like you said, Tony was the Hammer. And of course, being a young, impressionable freshman, full with energy. And so one day I'm sitting in the office. I think I was preparing for an update for the news that we were doing that night. And Pete pokes his head in and says, "Do you want to know your nickname?" And I said, well, I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and I'm like, yeah, I don't care, whatever. So he pokes his head back out, pokes his head back in and says, "It's Peaches." Meanwhile, that was a total ruse. The guys who were in charge, Stu and Glenn and Ben.
There were people in charge of nicknames?
Yes.
Just didn't come naturally?
No, it was I guess it was the sports director, ultimately the sports director's job to hand out the nicknames.
Yeah. Ideas were branded about.
Yeah.
Indeed. There were straw polls taken, focus groups, all sorts of research done. So then the powers that be, the guys in charge, they heard the story and they started looking at each other like, okay, it's Peaches.
For no apparent reason.
For no reason whatsoever. I don't even know where Pete came up with the idea. It was just a word that came into his head, and that's where the nickname came from.
Well, it worked.
And I guess it did.
Pete was always a riot. Let's I tell you what, let's start talking a little bit about covering the teams that we covered. Back in the 80s, we were covering football and men's and women's basketball, and that was it. We didn't do baseball, we didn't do softball or lacrosse or soccer.
We started to do lacrosse my senior year.
Right.
Jay Brayman did some lacrosse games from the stadium because they had the phone line installed there, so they were able to do games from select games from the stadium when there wasn't any other programming on. We were able to do a few games from there.
And a lot of the facilities didn't have phone capabilities or power, which really limited us for how we could cover a game, and that's a lot of the reason why we didn't do that.
And I give credit to head coach John Danowski. That is the same John Danowski who's currently the head coach of Duke Lacrosse. But John loved the radio station. He wanted us badly to cover his team. And especially for me, I didn't even really know the sport at all. And by the time we were done with basketball season, and it was kind of like the beginning of March, I was kind of burnt out as far as, being involved from football season right to basketball season, and now thinking, we need to take a break. And I kind of regret that because I thought it would have been nice to have a spring season because we didn't do any baseball or softball because they didn't have facilities. And I didn't want our guys sitting out there in the open with our equipment just sitting out there trying to broadcast a game where there wasn't any protection for either the broadcasters or the equipment. But lacrosse, like Marsh said, we had a football stadium already, so we did have the facility. But to be quite honest, like I said, I wasn't really into the sport like I am now, and I guess that's one of the regrets I guess I have, if there are any, of not being able to try to follow through. But John, like I said, John really loved the radio station and really wanted us to be involved with that.
And back in the 80s, football was Division III. Of course, later on it went to Division I. Joe Gardy was the head coach there for most of that run of 1AA. But Division III, and I always say this, maybe 1AA. Yes, you're getting a different quality of player. There are scholarships, more scholarships and all that, and a higher level of play. But I really enjoyed.
The stadium got an upgrade because of it too.
Right. But
the
I
problem
enjoyed
with that was the same 5,000 people that were going to the stadium when it was a capacity of 7,500.
Right.
Were the same 5,000 people going to the game when it was a 15,000 seat stadium. So
yeah. But Division III, to me, I prefer Division III because we were playing a lot more local teams, and I feel like being able to play CW Post and Wagner and some of the other locals, and I've talked to Ed Fingerling about this, who played for Hofstra under Mickey Kwiatkowski, and has been a friend to the radio station and to the show for a while. A lot of these guys knew each other. They knew each other from high school. They played against each other. They played with each other. And so there was more of a rivalry because of Division III and playing local teams, and it meant more to them. And I think when Hofstra went 1AA and you start playing teams a lot further away, there isn't that rivalry because there's been a long standing. We've played these schools a lot, and we've played against these guys when we played back in high school. I think that again, I always say Division III. I preferred it because of that factor, because you had that local factor built in to all your games.
And the teams were good. That was the other thing. The teams were nationally competitive. They were nationally ranked. Back then, I think Division III, they ranked teams by geographical area of the country, sure. And we were always in the top 3 or 4 within Division III East.
Right. And that's
how that made the games fun.
And that's how they seeded them for the playoffs, because in my 4 years there, they made the playoffs every single year. Unfortunately, lost in the first round every year, but making the playoffs, because that's how they seeded the teams back then in Division III. Maybe they still do it, but it was basically the top 4 teams in each region of the country, and that's how they brought in 16 teams into the playoffs.
And we mentioned Ed Fingerling. I know that is it Jim Cusack or is it somebody else on YouTube has some video of some games there from the 80s. It's kind of fun to go through some of that as well. And we just had a lot of fun talking to Mickey Kwiatkowski, the head coach. He was, to me, as much fun as it was covering the games, doing the pregame and talking to Mickey was always a blast. And I want to give the folks just a little taste of, one time we're doing a show and we're talking to Mickey about the conditions. I believe it was before a game at Hobart, and he talked about how weather affected or really didn't affect the team.
Well, I'm not too sure. Our players don't think the word away means miserable. I'm not really sure. The definition couldn't be changed to fit this season. Every time we go away, the weather's just unbelievable. Right. I mean, we played in the most miserable, cold, rainy conditions you could absolutely have at Catholic. We went out to WashU, and the weather wasn't so bad temperature-wise, but the field was a quagmire. Tony, you saw it. I mean, it was just, you couldn't walk across it without losing your shoes. And then we go up to Albany, where it's freezing cold, night game, windy, the whole thing. And again, we performed. So, I expect today to be the same type of thing. I mean, we're expecting some snow showers this afternoon, and we've never played Hobart where it hasn't snowed. The field's in miserable condition, and our guys have really gotten to laugh at this, and I think that's a great attitude. And with that attitude, to answer the other part of your question, we'll play anybody, anywhere, in any temperature, any conditions, and I think we'll be fine because we don't make it an issue.
And always love talking to Mickey. His pregame.
Let's lace him up. Let's go. I'm pumped.
He had a great sense of humor, Steve. I mean, we always laughed every show we did with him.
Yeah, and it didn't really take much. We didn't really have to ask him too many questions because you just feed him a line and he'll just go off on that. And yes, you're right. The Thursday morning when we would tape the pregame show for the Saturday games was definitely the highlight of the week. Was talking to Mickey both about the previous game that was played and previewing the game that was coming up,
and talking about the Delaware wing tee.
Oh yes.
As many great memories as we had with football, guys. The three of us.
There's only one.
Have had one experience that was not great. It was the round one playoffs of 1987. Fordham comes in to visit Hofstra, and it is incredibly cold out. And without throwing a single pass, Fordham beats Hofstra 41-6.
Yeah.
It was a depressing game to watch, and the chance of frostbite for all three of us, as Steve and I were on the call and Marshall was doing stats for us up in an unheated press box that we were in calling a game. It was maybe one of the most miserable games I've ever done.
And having to keep the window open because we had to throw the mic outside to get crowd noise.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, it was incredibly cold. And as you said, they didn't throw a pass, and I'm doing stats, and I was able to, I had the ability to keep pretty good live stats going and able to keep basic stuff, just passing yards and attempts. And I had a whole column of passing yardage ready to go and didn't even use it.
By the way, those of you listening who might be younger, when he says keeping stats, he doesn't mean entering them into his laptop. He means writing them on a piece of paper with really ink that was freezing in his pen at the time.
I brought a pencil.
And of course,
there you go.
And of course, being the professionals that we were, we dressed especially for a football playoff game. So we're in our suits and our dress shoes and obviously our very thin pants. And I'm not exaggerating. It was 50 below wind chill.
Yeah.
The wind was absolutely howling. And like you said, even though we were in a press box where we had to have the window slightly open to run that mic cable out, by the third quarter, we were ready to pack it in.
Yeah.
We were, I don't know what kept us on the air for that last quarter because the game was, the outcome was not in doubt, and we were just flat out miserable. And then the thought of carrying that 50-pound behemoth of a strongbox back to the radio station after the game was over, I don't know how we got through it, but that is the one football memory that I carry still till this day. And it was at one point where we finally made it back to the radio station. We're freezing. I'm standing next to station manager Jason Levy at the time. I think it was station manager, either program director or station manager. I'm standing next to Jason Levy, and now he's freezing just because of the cold that's emanating from me. He started getting chills just by sitting next to me.
You give all of us goosebumps, Steve.
Thank you.
I couldn't have been, I thought I was thankful to have the headset microphones that year just because it would make our call easier. I didn't realize one of the reasons I was going to be thankful is that it would keep my ears from freezing and falling off my head. And it was the only thing that was keeping me somewhat warm that day was having a pair of headphones on.
And I think you were the only one that had a headset because I believe I remember wearing gloves and holding on to the handheld the whole time doing that.
Yeah.
And as I'm freezing and shivering, so the microphone is dancing all around because I'm shivering so much, trying to maintain myself on microphone.
That's true. I forgot you didn't have a headset. It was just
I don't think I did. No.
Well, I was calling it play-by-play, but by the third quarter there wasn't much to call.
No, there was not.
And I was probably thinking, well, being that they're not throwing the ball, you really don't need a stats guy. I can just go, right?
And we said, "Oh no, you're staying up here with the rest of us."
Well, that's one of the tough stories. The other one, quickly before we move on, maybe to talk a little bit about basketball, was the homecoming in the early 90s that I came back to do with Ben Buchwald. And Steve was on the sideline for that one. And of course, our luck continued in that game as we hit a rainstorm, a monsoon that was ridiculous, knocked our power out, I think twice, going back to the studio. And Steve was doing sideline work and getting drenched.
that umbrella was using me for protection. I'll tell you that much.
And it was
showing how technologically advanced. I think that was like our first experience with a wireless microphone.
Yeah,
that's what you had me on a wireless microphone down on the field, and it was fun doing it. Yeah, until it started raining, and then you said, "You know what? We don't really need you on the sideline. Why don't you come back up in the booth with us?"
Yeah, that was another brutal game. Hey, we're gonna come back and talk basketball in just a second, but I'm gonna take a little bit break here with another blast from the past and a little football promo that Stu and I put together with Jeff Krause.
Stu? Hey, Stu, I need to discuss something with you.
Hey, sure, Jeff. What's up?
Well, I was reviewing your expenses for the football season, and they seem quite extravagant, really quite
extravagant. But Jeff, you should know by now that Hofstra football over WRHU is a nationwide craze.
Yeah, sure, right. But what's the real reason Stu plan on entertaining guests for each game?
Oh, come on, Jeff. You know we spare no expense in presenting Hofstra football to our listeners each and every week, both home and away, on 88.7 FM, WRHU Radio Hofstra University.
Well, I can understand that, but these expenses are still outrageous. I just cannot fathom any reason for just oh my God, everybody run! Let me guess. Life insurance for when Goldman is driving?
Hey, very good, Jeff. How'd you guess?
Oh, shut up, Rushfield.
And we're back. Tony Sibilla, Steve Goldman, Marshall Hausfeld, as we continue down the road of the sports guys in the 1980s, the mid to late 80s. And again, always fun to hear those old promos that we put together. And getting Jeff involved, he was reluctant to do that one initially, but he eventually said, okay, I'll do it. And we had some radio gold with him. Always a blast to get Jeff involved with something sports-related, but as much as he was not a big sports fan, he did like to help out everybody as much as he could. And we had a lot of fun doing some of these promos with Jeff.
Were you, Steve, was your driving that much of an issue?
No, but it sort of stemmed from the fact that on the way home, I can't remember what I was on the way home from or for, but in the Bronx, I was cited for speeding, and so that sort of just became a running joke about my driving exploits.
Okay.
Hey,
But beyond that, no, there was nothing. I don't see anything. I don't see anything of an issue there.
Because when I was on a road trip with Stephen Oling, we rented a car out in California, and the ride from the airport to the hotel was rife with excitement because in California they don't have the traffic lights mounted in the center of the street. They're more on the side. And that was news to Stephen Oling, who probably ran 15 or 16 red lights in a 15-mile trip. And I thought I was going to die about 20 times. And I asked him, hey, are you going to just stop at any of these? Or is this just one of these East Coast things? And he's like, what are you talking about? He just had no idea that there were traffic lights. He was like, just driving right through them, and cars were honking. Yeah. And so I would imagine that Stephen would have been part of that promo.
I don't know.
That would be current ESPN producer Stephen Oling, who's been there since, since 93, I believe. Yeah, I believe he just completed his 25th year working at ESPN.
Again, another radio guy who's stuck a long time with the great sports outlet, and we say hi to Steve Oling, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to him. We do some more shows down the road, have some more fun with this. But let's got a fefew more minutes left to go in this show. Let's talk a little bit about basketball. And, of course, we covered men's and women's. And Stu Rushfield did a lot of the men's basketball. I think Steve did a lot of that as well. I did a few games. Marshall and I did a lot of the women's basketball and got a chance to call games when Harvey Pizer was there as a head coach, and then Lorraine Hoffman took over in '87. So both of them, again, very respectful of the radio station, of the guys covering the games, more than happy to give us what we needed to be able to do that. And then on the other side for the men, Dick Berg was there from '80 to '88, and then Butch Van Bredikoff came on and from '88 to '94, finishing out his career as a head coach in basketball. Won a championship in '94, as you heard in the intro. That '94 ECC tournament win was Butch's last game, and I was privileged to be able to call that game with Lon Samuelson. And again, we were very lucky, guys, to have head coaches who were more than happy to support what we were doing on the radio side.
Unless you bothered Butch on a bad day.
Well,
which
that was impossible.
Which he had a lot of.
Yeah.
Which fortunately I was never on the receiving end, but I can't speak for many others in the department.
But it was interesting, as you mentioned, winning the ECC unfortunately did not come with an automatic bid because there weren't enough teams in the league back then to qualify for an automatic bid. So as you say, we won the tournament, but that was the last game of the season for them.
And next year, I believe, was Jay's first year, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was. Absolutely. Both you guys, again, you guys covered some women's games with me, and Steve did some traveling with me with the women's basketball team. We talked about some of the players that we knew back then, and you heard, of course, a little bit earlier, Pam Banky with me on a call of one of the games. But Hillary Cramner is a Hofstra women's basketball legend, and just terrific. Always would talk to us. Sue Jewell and Sharon Solowitz were always game to talk to us and do interviews. I remember, was it Colleen Conroy, Steve, that her dad was taping the games? Was it her?
I think that might be right. I think you got me on that one. But yes, it was definitely one of the players' parents that was videoing the games.
Yeah, I videoed the game, and we give him an audio feed, and so I still have some VCR tapes of some of those games. And then Eileen McLennan and Marguerite Moran, who also was a standout Hofstra basketball player.
Tremendous range.
Yeah, just tremendously good players and good people to talk to. And we just had a blast traveling with these ladies. Steve and I, we recount the time we went out to Bucknell with the women's team and stopping off to have lunch, Steve.
Yes, we spent, well, of course, the drive from Hofstra to Bucknell, quite a lengthy one. So yes, we rode the team bus with the team, and of course, stopping at McDonald's to get something to eat before the game. And let's just say we were quite impressed with the calorie intake of the team.
Well, they're athletes, and that was the case. But Steve and I were sitting there with our little sandwiches, going, "Boy, I'm questioning myself right about now." But we just had a lot of fun talking to them and traveling with them, and the respect that they gave us was tremendous. And again, Marsh, you and I took a trip down to North Carolina, I believe it was.
It was Wake Forest, yes. It was a tournament down there, and the trip started off on a low note. The airline lost our luggage.
Yep.
On the flight down, and included in the luggage, not only just our personal stuff, was some of the equipment that would have been needed to actually do a broadcast. So there was
footnote. It was New Year's Eve, by the way, and we had a game the next day.
Yeah. So their airline was sort of like, we're pretty sure you'll get your stuff returned, because it was only going as far as Honolulu. That was where the luggage got routed to,
right,
from Winston-Salem to Honolulu, but they think that they will be able to get it in the connection and bring it back. And it was, I was just trying to figure out how we were going to put an expense account together for a broadcast that never happened. But fortunately, it came like a few hours before we were scheduled to go on air.
Yeah, and it was. I remember just staying. All the teams were there. The other broadcast teams were there as well in the same hotel. So while we were waiting for our luggage, everybody was getting together and having some fun on New Year's Eve. And one of the more memorable trips that we had, just because of all the different things that we had. And I think that trip also helped us. Have an even better relationship with Coach Hoffman and the players that year. It was, we were all having to travel on New Year's Eve. Nobody necessarily wanted to do that, but we just had a really good experience with everybody, and it was a memorable trip. Yeah,
as we like to say, I think more shots fell at the bar the night before than actually during the game.
And again, on the men's side, we talk quickly. We'll just talk about some of the players that we wound up dealing with on the men's side. We Frankie Walker, Leroy Allen were the two big players when we got there. Steve Rebholz, I've actually seen on numerous occasions after college, and I
just saw Steve a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact.
Steve
Rebholz is the head coach of the Copeg boys basketball team, and they are in the same league as the school that I work at. And every time I introduce him as the head coach, I always throw in a line for Hofstra. So it's something like the head coach of the Copeg Eagles is former Hofstra legend Steve Rebholz, and he eats it up every time. He loves getting the shout out every time. So he definitely appreciated his time playing there, and certainly appreciated the work that the radio station did for him.
Hey guys, we only got about a little less than 2 minutes here to go before we have to get out of here. Let's sum this up here, Marsh. So, quick couple of words about your time at WRHU in the 80s.
Thanks. Again, I had a very small role over the course of the 60-year history of the radio station. I'm glad I could fill just a small little part of it. But what the university and the radio station, of course, gave back to me has lasted a lifetime. So I really want to thank the people at the station now that are actually allowing us to go on the air with this, because I'm actually shocked they let me go on the air 30 years ago to go on now. That's just great. It's really great. So thanks to everybody there, and thanks, Tony, for putting this all together.
Steve, your final thoughts?
Seeing what this radio station has become, that it's been regarded as the best college radio station in the country, just gives me nothing but pride. Obviously, the memories that we have back from when we were there still resonate to this day. Loved every minute of it. So proud to be a part of this station. So proud to see where the radio station is coming. And as Marshall said, very appreciative that they're giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts.
And jealous that they actually have a basketball team worth covering.
Indeed.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you helping out tonight, Marshall and Steve. Marshall Hausfeld, Steve Goldman. This is Tony Sibilla saying so long. We hope you folks enjoyed a look back at the Sports Guys in the mid to late 80s. We'll hopefully be on again sometime soon and reminisce with you more, give you some more stories of past times here at Radio Hofstra University, WRHU.